Lenny, Frankie, Lucy, and Carl? You know the guitars, you know the rockers that play them, but do you know the story behind their names? I'm Thom Tran, and this is the story behind the strings. Thanks again to everybody who's watched the show. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. It's quick, it's free, and it totally helps the channel. Now this is going to be a very different episode because we're doing a listicle, everyone. I can feel your eyes rolling through your screen. But in an effort to grow the channel, I want to mess with the algorithm and see if it does anything. So here's a list of famous guitars and how they got their names. Let's start with this famous masterpiece. It really doesn't need an introduction, but just in case, this multicolored monster is a reproduction of Eddie Van Halen's famous Frankenstein guitar, or the Frankenstrat, or just Frankie. Now, I don't think that was ever its official name, but Ed famously put this beast together from $130 worth of parts that he bought from Boogie Body's Guitars in San Dimas, California. And because of its pieced-together origins, like the monster in Mary Shelley's book, it's commonly referred to as the Frankenstein. That, of course, being the name of the doctor in the book, not the monster itself, whose name was actually Roger.
No, not this time. It's totally made up. Pure fiction.
Now, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Fender Stratocasters go together like, well, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Texas Boogie. Sure, there's his famous #1 guitar, but just as famous is Lenny, named after his wife, Lenora. As the story goes, shortly before his 26th birthday in 1980, Stevie and then-wife Lenora were in a pawn shop in Austin, Texas. The pair came across a beat-up 1965 Fender Stratocaster, and the blues rock legend wanted it badly. But neither of the couple had the $350 to buy it at the moment. So Lenora reached out to 7 of their friends who each chipped in $50, and then a few days later, at Stevie's birthday celebration, Lenora and their friends presented him with the guitar. That night, while Lenora was asleep, Stevie sat at the kitchen table and penned the beautiful instrumental piece that he named after his beloved, calling it Lenny, and naming the guitar the same. Now, I love this one so much. Heavy metal gods Metallica aren't really known for sentimentality, but this guitar is a literal patchwork of recovered pieces that came from the remains of the actual garage where Metallica started their career. The shed at 3132 Carlson Boulevard in El Cerrito, California was Metallica HQ when the band started. They even wrote the albums Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets in that garage. Years later, the new owners had the shed torn down. Metallica frontman James Hetfield found out that a friend had kept pieces of the wood from their old rehearsal space. Hetfield then asked luthier Kenneth Lawrence to turn pieces of the scrap wood into both a tribute to the band's history as well as the next chapter of the Metallica story. The master guitar builder created a unique instrument, infusing with so much symbolism related to the band's history and future. It pays homage to their former bassist Cliff Burton, who was tragically killed in a bus crash in 1986. The guitar was named Carl after the address where the band started to ride the lightning, 3132 Carlson Boulevard. So you think your guitar is relic? You got nothing on Willie Nelson's Martin N20 nylon-strung acoustic guitar named Trigger. This 1969 Martin serial number 242830 became the country legend's #1 the same year it was built, to replace his Baldwin 800C acoustic. The story goes, between sets during one show, Willie set the 800C on a stage, some drunk stepped on it. Nelson took it to luthier Shot Jackson, who confirmed that the Baldwin was unrepairable. Jackson then sold Willie the Martin N20 and installed the previous guitar's Prismatone pickup and preamp into what would become one of the most legendary 6-strings in music history. With over a half-century of touring and recording, Trigger has a hole worn into it between the bridge and the actual sound hole. When asked why he named it Trigger, he famously said, quote, "Roy Rogers had a horse named Trigger. I figured, this is my horse." Now, what do the Beatles, Star Trek, and I have in common? Now, it's a very tenuous connection, but it's there, I assure you. Well, it's Lucille Ball, or just Lucy. I'll explain that in a minute. George Harrison's famed red-headed Gibson Les Paul Standard didn't start that way. It began its life as a 1957 Gold Top, and it was owned by the 11 Spoonfuls' John Sebastian. As the story goes, sometime in the mid-1960s, Sebastian traded it to Rick Derringer of the McCoys for an amplifier. Then around 1966 or so, Derringer had it refinished at the Gibson factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now the beat-up gold top was an SG-style clear red. But Derringer didn't like how the new paint job made the instrument sound, so he sold it to Dan Armstrong's guitar shop in New York City.
New York City!
Literally a couple of days later, Eric Clapton walks into Armstrong's store, then Slowhand buys the red Les Paul, and in 1968 gives it to his friend George Harrison of the Beatles, who then named it Lucy after the famous redheaded comedian Lucille Ball. So at the beginning of this, I asked what do the Beatles, Star Trek, and I have in common, and the answer was Lucille Ball. And here's how that works. Obviously, George Harrison of the Beatles named that Les Paul Lucy after Lucille Ball. Now, Lucille Ball and her husband, Desi Arnaz, through their company, Desilu Studios, produced Star Trek, the original series, in 1966. And if you know me at all, you know that I am a huge Star Trek fan, and I even have a Star Trek-themed rock band called The Bridge Crew. But also, as a stand-up comedian, there's a poster of me and my comedy group, the GIs of Comedy, hanging in the Lucille Ball National Comedy Museum in Jamestown, New York. Boom! I told you it was a tenuous connection. And we wrap up this episode with one of my guitars. This is my number one. This is the first guitar I reach for, and it's a guitar that's at every gig. This is my Ernie Ball Music Man Axis EX named Una, as in Una Chin Riley, the original number one. But Thom, you say, isn't that your Eddie Van Halen guitar from a previous episode that you named Valerie? No, it's not. If you remember from that video, I mentioned the Axis EX series. Well, I'm working on a video that will explain why this not Eddie Van Halen guitar is more of an Eddie Van Halen guitar than the Eddie Van Halen guitar. Hit the bell icon to be notified when that drops. That's it for this list. Did you name your guitar? What did you name it? And why? And right now I know that there are people screaming at their computers or phones saying, what about SRV's number one or Brian May's Red Special? Well, the theme I was going for was names, not titles. So unless you've met a kid named number one, I mean, I do call my oldest niece my number one, but that's because I'm a terrible uncle. And for those of you thinking, Thom, you forgot Lucille. Did I? Did I? Did I? Now you're thinking, was that there the whole time? Also, I'm planning a regular full episode about Lucille back there. As always, thanks for watching. Help the channel grow by hitting the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon to be notified when I drop a new episode, which is really, I'm gonna try for every 2 weeks. I said 3 weeks, but I think 2 is doable. Follow me on all the places, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And if you want to support the channel and have a few bucks laying around, think about becoming a Patreon patron to get exclusive contents, cool swag, and early access. And remember to tell your friends about the show. Totally helps. My stand-up comedy dates are all on my website, thomtran.com. Thanks again, and let the strings tell your story.